August 23, 1939. Suffolk coast, England. A cold wind rolled in from the North Sea, carrying with it the smell of salt and iron. Along the chalk-white cliffs near Bawdsey, enormous steel towers loomed over the quiet countryside, skeletal giants of metal stretching hundreds of feet into the grey sky. Their lattice frames hummed faintly as electric currents pulsed through the web of cables. Locals called them the listening towers. But to anyone passing by, they looked like strange, unfinished radio masts, relics of some abandoned experiment. Across the water, in Berlin, they were the subject of jokes. In a Luftwaffe briefing room thick with cigarette smoke and arrogance, officers of the Reich's Air Force laughed at reconnaissance photographs of those very towers. England's scarecrows, one colonel smirked, tapping the table with a gloved finger. They believe metal poles will stop the Luftwaffe, another said, drawing laughter. But behind the laughter was ignorance, and that ignorance would soon cost Germany the sky over Europe. Back in Suffolk, Flight Lieutenant Edward Teddy Haynes of the Royal Air Force climbed the narrow staircase inside the control hut beneath one of the massive towers. The hum of generators filled the air, vibrating through the wooden floorboards. On the wall, a green cathode ray screen glowed softly in the dim room. Haynes adjusted a dial and watched as a small line swept across the screen, pulsing once every second. Each time, faint spikes appeared, echoes of something moving through the air miles away. It was radar. Radio detection and ranging. A technology so new that only a handful of officers truly understood its power. Outside, technicians in khaki uniforms adjusted the directional antennas, aligning them toward the sea. They called this secret chain of towers, Chain Home. Stretching from the Scottish coast to the Isle of Wight, it was the spine of Britain's new air defence, a line of eyes that could see over the horizon. Haynes turned to his superior, Squadron Leader Henry Pritchard. "Sir, I'm getting intermittent returns at 60 miles. Could be a training flight from France." Pritchard nodded. "Or it could be something else. Keep watching, Lieutenant." At that same hour, hundreds of miles away in a Luftwaffe research office in Berlin, a young engineer named Dr. Hans Hallmann had been studying British advancements in radio technology. He had warned his superiors that the British might be experimenting with radiolocation systems capable of detecting aircraft. But his warnings were ignored. "Impossible," declared General Feldmarschall Hermann Göring. "No machine can see through the clouds. The Führer wants action, not science fiction." The arrogance was intoxicating. After all, the Luftwaffe had swept across Europe almost unchallenged, over Poland, Norway, Denmark, and France. Every air defense system they had faced had crumbled. They believed Britain would be no different. But what they didn't know was that the British had already turned the invisible waves of radio into their greatest weapon. By early 1940, every radar station along the coast was connected by telephone lines to the filter room at Fighter Command Headquarters in Bentley Priory. When radar detected incoming aircraft, operators plotted them on a massive map table. From there, information flowed to group and sector stations, each controlling squadrons of Hurricanes and Spitfires. It was the first integrated air defense network in history. And it was about to be tested in fire. On June 18, 1940, after the fall of France, Winston Churchill stood before Parliament and declared, "What General Vigan has called the Battle of France is over. I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin." The words reached both sides of the Channel. In occupied France, Luftwaffe reconnaissance units began photographing the English coast in detail. The images showed airfields, hangars, factories, and those same mysterious towers. In one report, a German analyst scribbled a note, unconfirmed, "radio masts of unknown purpose." But when the document reached Göring's desk, he scrawled across it in red pencil, "Irrelevant. Prepare for Adlerangriff, the Eagle attack." And so, as the summer of 1940 unfolded, the German High Command prepared to break Britain's will. The British, outnumbered and isolated, prepared to survive. The fate of Europe would be decided not only in the skies over Kent and Sussex, but in the flickering green light of radar screens inside cramped huts along the coast. July 10, 1940. Pas-de-Calais, northern France. The dawn broke over rows of Luftwaffe bombers lined neatly across the tarmac, Heinkel He 111s, Dornier Du 17s, and the sleek, angular Junkers Ju 88s. Ground crews hurried between the aircraft, refueling tanks, loading bombs, checking engines. The air smelled of oil, exhaust, and the metallic tang of anticipation. From a makeshift command post nearby, General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, commander of Luftwaffe II, studied a large operations map spread across a table. Britain's southern coast lay across the Channel, a narrow strip of blue separating the Reich from its final obstacle in the west. "This will be quick," he told his staff officers confidently. "Once we destroy the RAF, the invasion can begin." But even now, Kesselring's intelligence was blind to the truth. His reconnaissance teams had mapped every airfield and harbor, yet they still underestimated those strange towers. Luftwaffe intelligence dismissed them as simple radio direction finders, harmless, primitive, and certainly not a threat to Germany's powerful air armada. At 8:15, the first formations of bombers took off. Engines roared, wheels lifted, and hundreds of aircraft rose into the pale sky in tight V formations, escorted by sleek Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. Across the Channel, in the radar station at Dover, the calm hum of machinery suddenly changed. The green line on the scope jumped sharply, large blips, clustered, moving fast across the sea. "Multiple contacts at 100 miles and closing," reported aircraft woman Margaret Ellison, her voice steady but her pulse racing. Flight Lieutenant Haynes leaned over her shoulder. "Mark their bearing, 90 degrees from Calais. Estimate altitude and report to filter room immediately." Within minutes, the message traveled through the secret veins of Britain's air defense network. At Bentley Priory, the filter room came alive. Women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAFs, pushed colored markers across a giant map table, representing enemy formations. Plot confirmed, 30-plus bombers, heading toward the Thames estuary. Notify 11 Group. In the underground bunker at RAF Uxbridge, Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commander of 11 Group, stood over another map table. "Get Biggin Hill and Hornchurch squadrons up," he ordered. "We'll meet them over the coast." At Biggin Hill, the klaxon blared. "Scramble! Scramble!" Pilots sprinted from the ready room, boots pounding across the grass toward their Spitfires and Hurricanes. Engines coughed, roared, and the airfield filled with thunder as one after another, aircraft lifted into the sky. For the first time in history, radar had predicted an air raid before it was even visible. As the German formation crossed the English coast, the bombers were met by streaks of sunlight glinting off the wings of climbing fighters. "Bandits!" 11 o'clock high, a British pilot shouted over the radio. Tracer fire cut through the sky. Engines screamed. The calm of the morning erupted into chaos. The Luftwaffe pilots were stunned. The British had met them perfectly, not by chance, but with uncanny precision. Every time the Germans approached, the RAF was waiting. In Berlin, when the first reports arrived, Göring refused to believe it. "They can't possibly see us coming," he barked. "Our formations are crossing at high altitude under cloud cover." But day after day, the same thing happened. The British fighters appeared exactly where they were least expected, and disappeared just as fast, ready for the next attack. By late July, Luftwaffe losses began to rise. Bombers were being shot down in increasing numbers before even reaching their targets. Intelligence officers scrambled to find explanations. Some suggested that the British had spotters or secret observation balloons hidden along the coast. Others speculated about advanced listening devices. No one dared to propose that those odd towers, the ones Göring had laughed at, were silently guiding Britain's defenses. Meanwhile, in the radar hut at Rye, Edward Haynes listened to the rhythmic sweep of the scope. Another formation was coming, larger than before. He glanced at his watch. "They're learning," he murmured. "They're coming higher, trying to slip through the beam." His commanding officer smiled faintly. "Let them try. We'll still see them coming." Outside, the English Channel shimmered in the afternoon sun, dotted with the distant specks of approaching aircraft. The battle for the skies had begun in earnest. August 13, 1940. Adler Tag, Eagle Day. The code word flashed across Luftwaffe command radios just before dawn. Every available bomber and fighter wing would strike Britain in a massive, coordinated assault designed to crush the RAF once and for all. From airfields in France, Belgium, and Norway, the German war machine lifted into the sky. Engines roared like thunder rolling across the continent. In the control rooms below, Luftwaffe ground staff cheered, convinced that this day would end Britain's resistance. But across the channel, the hum of radar towers filled the air like a heartbeat. From Ventnor to Dover, the operators were already awake, headphones pressed to their ears, watching the scopes. Large plots forming near Calais. Estimate, 200-plus contacts, reported aircraft woman Ellison, her pencil flying across the log sheet. 200? Haynes repeated, scanning the screen. "That's no raid, that's an invasion." Within minutes, phones across the chain home network rang in unison. Messages flowed to Bentley Priory and out to every fighter sector. Inside the filter room, WAAF plotters pushed markers faster than ever, voices sharp and precise. Mass formation approaching the Thames. Another group north of Cherbourg, heading for Portland. Notify 11 Group and 10 Group immediately. At RAF Tangmere, squadron leader Douglas Bader slammed his goggles down over his eyes. "All right chaps, time to dance," he called over the radio as his hurricanes surged forward. To the Germans, the first shock came within minutes of crossing the coast. The radio chatter erupted with confusion. Spitfires. Where did they come from? They knew we were coming, they're climbing right into our path. In the chaos above the English Channel, sunlight flashed on wings and bullets tore through thin aluminum. One Heinkel went up in flames, spiraling down in a black trail of smoke. Another formation of bombers broke apart, scattering desperately to avoid the interceptors that seemed to appear from nowhere. On the ground, at Bentley Priory, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, the quiet architect of Britain's air defense system, stood behind the glass wall of the operations room. He watched as colored lights flickered across the map, each one representing a battle raging in the sky. "Everything is working as planned," he murmured. "They still don't understand." Dowding's creation, the world's first integrated air defense network, was performing flawlessly. Radar stations spotted incoming raids. Filter rooms processed the data. Commanders directed squadrons only when and where needed, conserving precious aircraft and fuel. While the Luftwaffe burned itself out in endless waves of attacks, the RAF fought efficiently, surgically, always knowing when the enemy was coming and from where. By contrast, the Germans were fighting blind. In occupied France, Luftwaffe signals officers began noticing a strange pattern. Every time their aircraft crossed the coast, the British fighters rose instantly. When they returned, the skies fell silent again. General Kesselring grew frustrated. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. "Our radio frequencies are secure, our flight plans unknown. Someone is warning them." A young intelligence officer hesitated before answering. "Sir, there are reports about those towers along the coast." "Perhaps they—" Kesselring cut him off with a scoff. "Those rusty masts? Do you think poles and wires can defeat the Luftwaffe?" But in Berlin, others were starting to take the reports more seriously. Dr. Hullman, the same engineer who had warned of British radio detection months earlier, was now summoned by the Air Ministry. Could the English have developed a system to locate aircraft by radio waves? An officer asked. Hullman nodded grimly. "Yes, my general. It's called radar. And if they've built a chain of them, they can see every one of your aircraft before it even reaches their coast. The officer frowned. Why were we not told this sooner? Hallman's reply was quiet. Because you laughed at the towers. By mid-August, Göring's frustration turned into fury. Every day, more bombers were being lost, more pilots failing to return. British cities had been hit, but the RAF still fought on, stronger, faster, and seemingly omniscient. In the radar hut at Dover, the operators continued their relentless work. Each sweep of the beam meant another warning, another battle fought in the skies above. Haynes glanced at the wall clock. 15:42, another raid inbound. He rubbed his eyes and smiled faintly. We're holding, sir. His superior nodded. Yes, we are. And they still don't know how. Outside, the sound of Spitfires thundered overhead, racing toward the incoming enemy. The tide of the Battle of Britain was beginning to turn, not by luck, not by numbers, but by invisible waves pulsing from those mocked, toy towers that saw everything. August 18, 1940. The hardest day. The Luftwaffe had grown desperate. Despite weeks of relentless raids, the RAF refused to break. The bombers returned to France bloodied, their escorts depleted, their confidence shaken. British radar seemed to predict every move, every course, every altitude, every deception. Inside the Führerhauptquartier in East Prussia, Hermann Göring slammed his fist against the map table. These accursed English dogs, he roared. They appear before our bombers as if they can see through the clouds. What sorcery is this? An intelligence officer cautiously stepped forward. Main Reichsmarschall, it may not be sorcery. Reports indicate those coastal towers might play a role in their early warnings. Göring glared at him. You mean those ridiculous metal frames? The ones we ignored? The officer hesitated. Yes, sir. They call them radio detection towers. Göring's eyes narrowed. Then we'll destroy them. Within hours, new orders went out across occupied France: target the towers. The Luftwaffe's next mission would strike directly at the heart of Britain's invisible shield, the chain-home radar network. August 12, 1940, 2 days before Eagle Day. Dawn light crept across the Isle of Wight, illuminating the tall steel structure at Ventnor Radar Station. The operators inside the small wooden hut were already at work, unaware that they were about to become targets. Across the channel, a formation of Ju-88 bombers streaked toward them, flying low over the waves. The air crews had been briefed: destroy the towers. Without them, the RAF will be blind. As the bombers approached the English coast, radar operators detected their presence, ironically, moments before the first bombs fell. Contacts incoming, began one operator, before the radio cut to static. The Ju-88s roared overhead. Explosions ripped through the cliffside. The radar hut collapsed in a shower of timber and dust. The great steel tower groaned and bent under the impact of near misses, its cables whipping in the wind. The attack succeeded in silencing Ventnor, but only temporarily. By nightfall, repair crews from the RAF's signals branch had already arrived. Under the cover of darkness, they worked by lantern light, replacing shattered insulators, reconnecting torn cables, and setting up a mobile transmitter. Within 48 hours, Ventnor was back online, scarred, but operational. At Bentley Priory, Dowding received the update with a faint smile. They can bomb our towers, he said, but they can't destroy the system. Because even as a few radar stations went dark, the rest of the network filled the gaps. Chain Home was designed with redundancy, overlapping coverage zones, backup communication lines, and mobile radar units hidden inland. When Göring's staff reviewed reconnaissance photos days later, they were astonished to see the same towers still standing. How is this possible? Göring fumed. We hit them directly. Kesselring offered a grim shrug. Perhaps they repaired them. Then we'll hit them again. Goring snapped. But that, too, was futile. The British radar system could not be bombed out of existence. It was not a single target, but an entire organism, dozens of linked stations, each feeding into the next, each able to adapt. Meanwhile, in the radar hut at Reich, Haynes and Ellison watched their scope flicker again. "Looks like they're testing our edges," Haynes murmured. "Smaller formations, trying to sneak between towers." "They're learning," Ellison said quietly. "Yes," Haynes replied. "But so are we." The operators began experimenting with new filtering techniques, adjusting frequencies, refining signal interpretation, distinguishing enemy aircraft from friendly, even identifying altitudes. Their accuracy improved daily. The once crude British radar system was evolving into a finely tuned instrument of war. In France, frustration reached a breaking point. Luftwaffe pilots whispered among themselves, "The English always know we're coming." Some claimed to have seen the eerie glow of radar beams on their dials, others thought the British were guided by divine luck. On August 20th, Goring ordered a change of strategy. "Forget the towers," he declared. "If the RAF continues to fight, then we shall destroy the airfields that shelter them." It was a fatal decision, the moment the Luftwaffe turned away from the true key to victory. As the bombers shifted their focus inland, the radar towers, bent, patched, and still humming, continued their silent vigil. Every sweep of the beam meant another warning, another chance to fight. And for the men and women inside those cramped huts, their secret war continued in the shadows. Haynes looked out the window as Spitfires roared overhead, climbing to meet another incoming wave. The sun glinted off their wings, bright, defiant, and alive. He turned back to the screen, the green line sweeping rhythmically across it. "They can mock us all they want," he said softly, "but these towers will hold." August 24, 1940. The roar of engines filled the summer sky above southern England. The Battle of Britain had reached its fiercest phase. Day after day, wave after wave of German bombers crossed the Channel, and day after day, they were met by climbing Hurricanes and Spitfires, guided unerringly by the unseen eyes of the radar network. At RAF Hornchurch, the air was thick with the smell of fuel and sweat. Pilots dozed in deck chairs by their aircraft, exhaustion etched into their faces. The crackle of the operations phone jolted them awake. Enemy formation detected. 80+, approaching Dover. Angels 15. The squadron leader, his cigarette half-smoked, dropped it in the grass and shouted, "Scramble." Within minutes, engines roared to life. Spitfires rolled down the runway, lifting into the hazy blue sky. From above, the English coastline gleamed beneath them, serene, defiant, unaware of the invisible machinery keeping it safe. At the same moment, in a radar station near Pevensey, Flight Lieutenant Haynes and aircraft woman Ellison watched the screen light up. "Multiple contacts, bearing 095, Ellison called out. "Range 70 miles, closing fast." Haynes picked up the phone to Bentley Priory. "This is Pevensey. Large inbound formation. Looks like the main force." "Understood," came the clipped reply. "Fighter Command acknowledges. Vector 11 Group interceptors to intercept." The message raced across the command network. In the filter room, WAAF plotters moved markers in a precise ballet of coordination. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park studied the shifting lines and circles with calm intensity. "Biggin Hill and Kenley squadrons up. Tangmere to cover Portsmouth. Tell them to hit the bombers before they reach London." Above the Channel, the two forces met head-on. The first Messerschmitts dove to engage the British fighters. Contrails twisted like white ribbons against the sky. Cannon shells flashed, turning clouds into scenes of chaos. Pilot Officer Alan Deere of 54 Squadron lined up a bomber in his sights. "Tally-ho," he shouted. The Spitfire's 8.303 Brownings opened fire. Tracer rounds tore into the Heinkel's wing, and the bomber erupted into flame, plummeting toward the sea. "Another one down," a voice cheered over the radio. But for every bomber shot down, more poured through. London loomed ahead, a glittering prize. The German crews gritted their teeth and pressed on. Then, suddenly, the sky filled with defenders. Squadrons from across southern England converged, precisely coordinated, perfectly timed. It was as though the RAF had eyes in every direction. From the cockpit of his Bf 109, Oberleutnant Karl Fischer could hardly believe it. "They're everywhere," he shouted over the radio. "How can they know where we are?" His commander's voice crackled back. "Keep formation. The Reichsmarschall demands results." But Fischer's own words summed up the Luftwaffe's torment, disbelief turning to fear. Inside the war room at Bentley Priory, Dowding stood silent as reports came in. 20 enemy aircraft destroyed over Dover. 11 down over the Thames estuary. Minimal losses on our side. Dowding's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "Well done, all of them," he said quietly. "Radar saw them coming, and radar gave us time." His deputy turned to him. "Do you think the Germans understand what they're facing?" Dowding shook his head. "Not yet. They still believe victory comes from numbers. They haven't learned that in this war, information is the real weapon." By early September, the pattern was unmistakable. The Luftwaffe could no longer surprise Britain. Every major raid was met with resistance. Every deception failed. In one last gamble, Göring ordered his bombers to shift focus again, from airfields to cities. If he could not destroy the RAF on the ground, he would break British morale instead. And so, on September 7, 1940, the first great raid on London began. As sirens wailed across the capital, radar screens up and down the coast traced the incoming armada. The blips filled the scope, hundreds of aircraft. At the height of the attack, Haynes and Ellison stood in the bunker beneath their tower. Dust shook loose from the rafters with every distant explosion. "God," Ellison whispered, "how many of them are there?" "Too many," Haynes said grimly. "But at least we knew they were coming." Through the night, London burned. But the RAF struck back with equal ferocity. Guided by radar vectors, British night fighters found bombers in the dark, their guns lighting up the black sky. Each morning, the radar stations checked their equipment, recalibrated their screens, and prepared again. The system never slept. Even under bombardment, the towers stood, pocked with shrapnel, cables scorched, yet still humming. Across the channel, Luftwaffe headquarters was silent. Losses were mounting. The invasion barges at Calais gathered rust. Kesselring's intelligence officers presented grim statistics. 300 aircraft lost this week alone. Pilot fatigue critical. RAF operational strength stable. The verdict was inescapable. Britain had survived, not by miracle, but by mathematics, steel, and radio waves. Göring's once proud boast, that no enemy aircraft would fly over Germany, now mocked him. It was the Luftwaffe that could no longer fly freely. In the quiet coastal hut at Bawdsey, Haynes stood outside beneath the now familiar hum of the radar tower. The sea wind brushed against his face. Dawn broke over the horizon, pale and cold, but peaceful. Ellison joined him, a cup of tea in her hand. "Do you think they'll come again?" she asked. He looked out toward the waves where so many had fought and fallen. "They might," he said softly. "But next time, we'll see them first." The radar beam swept across the channel once more, a pulse of light invisible to the human eye, yet powerful enough to change the course of history. And for the first time in the war, Britain stood unbroken. October 1940. Autumn rain fell over the English countryside, washing the soot and ash from the ruins of bombed cities. The Battle of Britain was not yet over, but the storm had passed its peak. The Luftwaffe's raids had grown smaller, less coordinated, their formation scattered, their confidence broken. Inside the operations room at Bentley Priory, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding reviewed the latest figures. RAF Fighter Command had lost 1,000 aircraft, but the Luftwaffe had lost twice as many. Britain still controlled its skies. He adjusted his spectacles and murmured to his aide, "It wasn't courage alone that saved us. It was knowledge, and the courage to use it." Across the channel, the mood inside Luftwaffe headquarters was bitter. At Carenhall, Göring's palatial estate, the once proud Reichsmarshal stalked the marble halls in silence. Reports from field commanders lay on his desk, grim reading. Radar installations identified as critical to British defense. Repeated efforts to destroy them ineffective. Enemy coordination remains unaffected. General Kesselring entered quietly, cap in hand. "Main Reichsmarschall," he said, "our pilots are exhausted. We are losing too many men for too little result. The English are always waiting for us. Always." Göring didn't look up. "Then we change tactics again," he muttered. "If we cannot destroy their machines, we will destroy their will to fight." But even that plan was failing. Night after night, the Blitz fell upon London, yet the British spirit hardened rather than broke. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, British scientists and engineers were already working on the next generation of radar, smaller, more precise, capable of detecting not just formations, but individual aircraft. One cold evening in late October, in the radar hut at Dover, Haynes sat at the console as the last sweep of the beam flickered across the screen. The room was quiet except for the low hum of machinery. Ellison set down a fresh cup of tea beside him. "Do you think they finally understand what these towers do?" she asked. Haynes smiled faintly. "I think they understand too late." He leaned back, listening to the soft rhythm of the rotating transmitter outside, a heartbeat of invisible energy pulsing into the night. "They called them toys," he said. But these toys held the line. Far away in Berlin, Dr. Hans Hallmann, the radar engineer whose warnings had been ignored, was summoned once again by the High Command. This time, the mood was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by uneasy respect. "Tell us," an officer demanded, "how did the British build such a system? Can we make one?" Hallmann spread his hands. "It's not just the machines," he explained. "It's the organization. They built a network, one that thinks faster than we can bomb. Even if you destroy a tower, the others still see. That is why they won." He paused, then added quietly, "and why we will lose if we keep fighting blind." The officer dismissed him with a scowl, but Hallmann knew the truth. Germany had entered the war believing its strength lay in numbers, speed, and shock. But Britain had shown that true power came from information, from knowing when and where to strike, and when to wait. Winter settled over the English coast. The radar towers stood silhouetted against grey skies, their steel frames rusted and weathered but unbroken. Farmers plowed fields beneath their shadows, fishermen returned to sea beneath the endless hum of radio waves. At night, when the clouds cleared, you could see the faint glimmer of stars above the towers, silent witnesses to a war fought with light invisible to the eye. Inside one of the huts, a young technician logged the final entry of the shift. System operational. Coverage maintained. No hostile contacts. He closed the ledger and looked up at the tower outside. The same tower the Germans once mocked. The same tower that had changed the course of history. In the years that followed, radar would become the unseen cornerstone of modern warfare, guiding ships through fog, planes through darkness, missiles across continents. But its first and most crucial victory had come on those summer days in 1940, when a handful of British scientists, soldiers, and operators proved that steel towers and invisible waves could stop an empire. And in the ashes of defeat, even the German commanders who had once laughed at the toy towers, came to admit what had really happened. One Luftwaffe officer, captured late in the war, summed it up with weary honesty. We thought we were fighting pilots. But we were fighting ghosts, ghosts made of radio waves. August 1940 had been meant to mark the fall of Britain. Instead, it marked the fall of German arrogance. The radar towers still stand today, silent, stoic, and skeletal against the wind, reminders that sometimes, the most powerful weapon is not the one you can see, but the one you cannot.